Okay, so continuing from where we left off, we have a blank Jupyter Notebook in which we can start writing code. And you'll notice that when we first go into a notebook, we get one empty cell that has this green box around it. We also have a flashing cursor, and also notice here that we have a little pencil symbol. What this means is that you're in an active cell, and this cell is ready to consume code. So just to verify that everything is working as it should, let's now add some Python code to this cell and then run its contents. So if I simply put print and put the string hello, and don't worry about this for now, we do cover everything in detail in the next section, we have now written some code in an active cell, but we haven't yet run the cell. Running a cell means that we execute the cell's contents, and to execute a cell, I can simply click on the run button within this toolbar and the cell will run. You can see that once I've clicked run, the cell is executed, a new code cell appears underneath in which we can write code, and our first line of code has the number 1 inside of square brackets. Now what this means is that this cell has completed running and it was the first cell that we run. If I now write another line of code in the cell underneath and write print goodbye, you can see that the second cell has now run. It has the number 2 inside because it's the second cell that was run in this notebook. And we've got another cell underneath in which we can start writing. Now you will have multiple cells in your notebook, and you would normally run the cells in order. But if I press the up arrow twice and go back to the very first code cell and then run this cell again, you can now see that we have a 3 inside of the top cell, a 2 in the second cell, because the top cell is now the latest code cell to be run. Now if you didn't want to click on the run button, there are some shortcuts you can use to run code cells. You can simply press Ctrl and Enter, which will run the code cell and keep the code cell selected after it has been run. You can also press Shift and Enter when you're on a code cell, which will actually run the cell and then select the cell below. Or you can also press Alt and Enter, or on a Mac this will be Option and Enter, and this will run the cell and insert a new code cell below. So you have a few options here with respect to executing and running a specific code cell. Now we've seen that when you have a code cell selected, a green box appears around the outside, which means that you're in an active cell. Now if I press Escape, you will see that the code cell has a blue bar down the left hand side and the pencil symbol disappears. This essentially means I'm in command mode and I can now use the up and down arrows to navigate the code cells accordingly. Now when you're in command mode, there are 2 very useful keyboard shortcuts that I want to share. Let's suppose I want to put a piece of code in between the print hello statement and the print goodbye statement. If I have the very top cell selected, i.e. print hello, I can put a cell underneath this cell by pressing the B key on the keyboard. Now this needs to be done when I'm in command mode, i.e. when I have that blue bar on the left hand side. And the B essentially stands for below. Alternatively, if I go down to the print goodbye statement and then press the letter A on the keyboard, this will place a cell above the cell that you had selected. So B places a new code cell below, A places a new code cell above. If I want to delete a code cell, I can double tap the letter D on the keyboard and this will delete a cell in its entirety. Once again, this needs to be done when you're in the command mode, which is done by pressing the escape key. So 3 very common keyboard shortcuts that you'll no doubt use frequently. Now so far, we've been working within a cell type known as a code cell. And this can be seen within this drop-down menu here. It states code. And this means that we can write code in these cells, and when we execute them, they will be interpreted and run accordingly. But we also have a couple of other code cell types. In fact, there are 4 cell types that we can use. We can use code, markdown, raw NB convert, and heading. Now the heading cell type is actually no longer supported and will show you a message that states that. Now instead, you're supposed to use markdown for your headings. And the raw NB convert cell type is really only intended for special use cases, so we're not going to touch on this for now. So the other cell type that I want to introduce you to is the markdown cell type. Now we've already seen how the code cell works, so let's now learn how to style text by using the markdown cell type. So if I select a new code cell, by default we work with a code cell type, but to change this I can either select this drop down menu here, or when in command mode I can press the M on the keyboard. M stands for markdown. Now when I do this, you can see that the in and the square brackets on the left hand side of the cell disappears. This now means we're working within a markdown cell, and if I press return, we then can activate that cell, which then shows that green box and the pencil up here. I can then write some narrative text which helps supplement the notebook with additional information. For example, I could put, "This is some text." Now to execute this code cell, we run the exact same shortcuts as we learned previously, and you can then see that "this is some text" is displayed to the screen. Now Markdown is a markup language that is a superset of HTML. So if I now go back up to that markdown cell and put an asterisk symbol before and after the word text, this will change the word text into italics. So we're even able to change the style of the markdown that we write. And if you're familiar with HTML, we can utilize HTML tags. So if I wanted to convert the word text into a bold format, I can wrap this in a B tag like so. And if I also wanted to underline the now bold italic text, I can also wrap this in a U tag, which then underlines the text accordingly. Now Jupyter allows us to create headers in Markdown, which are very useful to segregate your notebook into neatly organized sections. All we have to do is ensure we are in a Markdown cell and then type the hash symbol with a space. So for example, if I put the hash symbol and then write header 1, you can see that we get a big bold header when we run the cell. Now the more hash symbols you use, the smaller the header becomes. So underneath header 1, if I were to write 2 hash symbols and then put header 2, and then underneath header 2 put 3 hash symbols and then header 3, you can even see a preview within the markdown cell that hasn't been executed yet, but when I do execute this cell, you can see we end up with a nicely formatted header. Another thing you can do is create lists of bullet points, and you can do this by using dashes, plus signs, or asterisks. So for example, if I were to put an asterisk with a space and then put item 1, on the next line put a dash and a space, then put item 2, on the third line put a plus symbol and a space, and then put item 3, you can see that when I run this code cell, we get a list of 3 bullet points accordingly. Now we can also have sub items, so if I were to press the tab button and then put an asterisk and put sub item 1, you can see that we get a sub item accordingly with a different bullet point symbol. Now another great thing to note about Jupyter Notebook's Markdown capabilities is its syntax highlighting. Now if you want to insert a code example that you don't actually want your end users to run, i.e. you don't want it to be within a code cell, you can use Markdown to insert it. And the way we do this is by using inline code highlighting. To do this, all we need to do is surround the code with backticks. And all we need to use is triple backticks and then specify the programming language. So if I were to put to calculate 1 plus 1 in Python, all you need to do is, and then put a colon. On a new line, I can then put 3 backticks. I can then put the programming language Python. On a new line, I can then put the code that would need to be written in order to perform this calculation. So I could put print and then in brackets 1 plus 1. Underneath this, I can close the 3 backticks. And then when I run this code cell, you can see that we print the sentence accordingly, and then we get syntax highlighting with the exact code that would need to be written to print 1 plus 1 to the screen. A great way of being able to include syntax highlighting without your users having to run the actual code. Now within the menu bar, there are many standard options that you'll be familiar with, having used many other pieces of software, I'm sure. So you can create a new notebook, you can open the notebook, you can rename it. One thing to highlight is the ability to download as. So this enables you to export the notebook that you're currently working in, and you have a list of different formats that you can convert your notebook into. So you've got .py, you can convert it into an HTML file, and so on. You have the edit menu, which enables you to cut cells, copy cells, undo, delete cells, etc. So explore these in your own time. In the view menu, you can toggle the header on and off, and you can toggle the toolbar on and off, which will provide you more space, but obviously you'll need to know some shortcuts if you do decide to toggle these off. We've seen how to insert cells above and below using the A and B letters on the keyboard. You can run cells using the cell menu. And one final thing to note here is that sometimes you may need to restart your kernel if, for example, you run into code that doesn't stop running. And this can happen, and we'll see this later in the course. So what this may mean is you need to come into kernel and then press on interrupt or restart in order to bring your notebook back to life. You can also restart and clear output, which will basically undo all the execution of your code cells, so you're back to square one. If you then want all of your code cells to run once your kernel has restarted, simply click on kernel and then restart and run all. So there you have it, Jupyter Notebook in a nutshell. Just like any application or program, you will become more comfortable using it the more you use it. Throughout the course, I will continue to showcase shortcuts and capabilities that Jupyter Notebook has to offer. But for now, this gives us the fundamental knowledge we need to get started with our Python learning. It's also worth noting that there are many cheat sheets available online. Just simply type Jupyter Notebook cheat sheet into Google and you'll be presented with many PDF files that contain the main shortcuts you need to operate efficiently in Jupyter. In the next section, we're going to focus on the most fundamental concepts in Python that will help tremendously in the subsequent sections. And these are things that you need to know before we dive into the more detailed aspects later on in the course. So I'll see you in the next section.